Welcome to day 90 of my 90-day SAT prep series. Today is the last day, so congratulations on making it through the full 90 days. If you watched all 90 days of videos, hopefully you now feel better prepared to take the SAT. Hopefully your SAT score on practice tests has greatly improved throughout the duration of the 90 days. Hopefully you understand now what to look for on the SAT and how to pace the SAT better. So today, obviously, you have the SAT tomorrow if you scheduled it for day 91 being the day you take the SAT. Hopefully you did, because that's the way the course was designed. So today is meant to be that day before you do take the SAT. Now, that means we have a lot to cover because there's a lot of things you want to review the day before you take the SAT. So we're not going to waste too much time. We're going to go and get right into it. So today, what are we going to be doing? First thing is going to be a pacing review. So that pacing review is going to cover all 4 sections of the SAT in 8 minutes or less total. So that's going to be about 2 minutes per section. So on the math part, I'll go ahead and refresh the order of questions you should be doing, and then I'll also cover the pacing for the reading and writing. Then we're going to cover a reading passage. So I'll take you through a reading passage in about 11 minutes. Keep in mind, proper pacing for the SAT reading section is at most 11 minutes per passage, okay? So make sure you're trying to finish that reading passage in 9 to 11 minutes. Keep in mind, obviously, I'll be going through it, not you today, since it's the day before the SAT. I want you to go through it myself so I can kind of show you some strategies and things to look for. You can get that inside look into the mind of someone who's scored 1590 on the SAT as far as what I'm looking for on the test. Also, it will prevent you from being too mentally fatigued going into your test tomorrow. After that, we're going to do a grammar rules review. That's going to take probably right around 16 to 17 minutes total. Okay, so that's going to review pretty much all of those grammar rules we talked about towards the beginning of the 90 days, right? So we're going to cover all those grammar rules just kind of quickly. It won't be too in-depth, but it will cover them. After that, I'll go through a writing passage. That writing passage will take me right around 7 minutes. Okay, if you keep in mind, proper pacing for the SAT writing section, in my opinion, is right around 7 minutes per passage, thus completing the whole 4 passages in about 28 minutes, leaving you about 7 minutes to check your work. So you want to finish the whole writing section anywhere from 25 minutes to 30 minutes. After that, I'll go through I'll go through the math formulas and equations that you need to know. Okay, so all those math formulas and equations you need to know, I'll be going through them. That's probably going to take me somewhere around 15 minutes. Okay, after that, what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through a few select math and no calculator problems, and then a few select math with calculator problems to review for your test tomorrow. At the end of that, I'll spend about 5 minutes going through some final tips, just some final tips before the SAT tomorrow. They're not going to necessarily be things that are content based, but just things as far as little things that you can do to make sure that you have a good day tomorrow taking your SAT. So with that, let's go ahead and get started with the pacing review. So we're going to start the review of the pacing for each different section of the SAT with the math no calculator section. So the first thing that you're going to want to do is you're going to want to answer multiple choice questions 1 through 9, since those are going to be the easiest questions. And then after that, you're going to want to go and answer the free response questions 16 through 18. Okay, so at that point, after you've answered 1 through 9 and 16 through 18, you've answered all of the easier and mid difficulty questions on the math no calculator section. At that point, after answering question 18, you want to take a look at 19 and 20. If 19 and 20 look easy to you, then go ahead and do them next. Then go back and answer 10 to 15 in that order. If they look difficult, then go back and do 10 to 12 next. Now, after question 12 at that point, you'd want to go back and answer 19 and 20 before answering 13 and 15. Okay, so that's how I recommend pacing the math no calculator section. Now let's take a look at the math with calculator section. So pacing the math with calculator section. Once again, my suggested approach, you're going to want to start with those easier to mid difficulty multiple choice questions. So on the math with calculator section, that's going to be questions 1 through 18. Now after question 18, I recommend taking a look at 19 through 22 of the multiple choice part. If they look easy, go ahead and do them. So if you get to 18, you look at 19, looks easy, go ahead and do 19. And then if 20 looks easy, do 20. If 21 looks easy, do 21. If 22 looks easy, do 22. Okay, if at any point in 19 through 22 you find one that looks really difficult, then go on to step 3, which is going to be answering free response questions 31 to 35. So free response questions 31 to 35, they're going to be those easier to mid difficulty questions for the math with calculator section. After answering question 35, take a look at 36 to 38. If they look easy, go ahead and do them. If they look difficult, then go back to the multiple choice. Okay, so if 36 to 38 look difficult, go back to multiple choice wherever you left off and start going those through the multiple choice until you get to if you get to like 24, and then after 24 looks difficult and you know that 36 to 38 looked easier, you can go back to 36 to 38, but try to get through all the multiple choice if you go back to it, okay? And then after you're done with the multiple choice, come back and do 36 to 38. Now, if 36 to 38 looked easy to you and you went ahead and did them, then obviously you're just going back and finishing out the multiple choice. So that's going to be your guide to math with calculator pacing. If you want to pause the video, take a minute to look through that a little bit more, you can do that as well. Same thing with the no calculator pacing. But yeah, that's your quick review on pacing with the math sections. Okay, so now let's talk pacing with the SAT writing section. All right, so for the SAT writing section, obviously as you read through the passage, you're reading for different things than you are reading for when you do the reading passage. So as you read through the SAT writing passages, you're looking at things such as tense of your verbs. You're looking at things such as singular or plural subjects and singular or plural verbs, parallelism. You're looking at order of ideas, modifiers. You want to watch out for dangling modifiers, identifying independent and dependent clauses when you have to do a combination of sentences or figure out where commas need to go, semicolons, things like that. You want to pay attention to the relationship between ideas and between sentences and paragraphs. Another thing, if you see a 1 at the start of a paragraph, as in next to the first sentence, and then you see a 2 at the second sentence and so on, then what you want to do is find which sentence you're being asked to place. So go ahead and go to the question that asks you about placing a sentence within that paragraph or deleting or adding a sentence, whatever it may be, and go ahead and read what that is and come up with what should come before that sentence and what should come after it. That way you can place it as you read through the paragraph, so that way you don't have to reread the paragraph in order to place the sentence. Okay, now if you see a 1 above a paragraph and a 2 above the next paragraph, it means you're going to be asked something dealing with different paragraphs, in which case it can be helpful to go to the question that asks about the different paragraphs and figure out what it says, so you can sort of place whatever sentence you have to place, or find the order of the paragraphs as you read through, so you don't have to read through twice. Okay, so that can save you some time as well. All right, so some questions which are going to require you to read on before answering them. So these are going to be questions that I have some examples here. So these are going to be questions that ask you about introductions to paragraphs, transitions between sentences, contrast and comparison between paragraphs and sentences. Sometimes questions such as, should this sentence be kept, added, or deleted? You have to read on a couple sentences or one sentence in order to find if it should be kept, added, or deleted. Which choice introduces the information that follows it? You need to know which information follows it. Which choice is consistent with the writing that follows it? You need to know the writing that follows it. So anything that asks about things that follow it, or keeping a sentence, deleting a sentence, things like that, you're going to want to make sure you get some context by reading on a little bit before you answer them. And then as you're reading on, go ahead and answer any questions that arise as you're reading on. That way you don't have to reread that part again either. And then go back and answer the one that you had to skip over to get context on once you get enough context for it. So SAT writing section, you're just going to go through the passages in the order 1 through 4, because there's really no science section versus literature section of being stronger in one than the other. So you just want to go through the passages 1 through 4. That way you're not wasting time flipping between them, because there's really a negligible difference between the different passages there. So go through the questions as you see them. Like I said, don't want to waste time flipping between question 10 and question 30 too much. You just go through the questions as you see them. It helps you avoid having to reread text too. Try to answer all the questions in right around 25 to 30 minutes. That's going to leave you anywhere from 5 to 10 minutes then at the end to go back and check your work. So that'll be helpful as well. So that's going to be about 34, 41 seconds per question on average, leaving you 5 to 10 minutes, like I said. Final minutes, what you want to check, obviously first priority is going to be any questions you skipped that you left unanswered or were unsure of. After that, you're going to go make sure that your bubble sheet matches your booklet. If you're taking this pencil paper, if you're taking the SAT online, then obviously you don't have to worry about that. And then after that, you're just checking all the questions that you can. So start with the ones you're most unsure of, work the way to the ones you're most confident of. All right, now we got the SAT reading. So SAT reading section, let's talk pacing strategy for this one. You want to make sure that you're reading and making any annotations, which keep in mind your annotations should just be reserved to underlines, boxing, circling, things like that, so you don't have to stop reading. And you want to finish that initial read through in less than 4 minutes, ideally 3 to 3.5. You want to aim to answer all the questions on one passage in anywhere from 9 minutes to 11 minutes. That's going to leave you anywhere from 10 minutes to 20 minutes at the end to check your questions that you skipped over or were unsure of. And then you also want to make sure you're doing the passages in order that are easiest to you. So if you're better at science passages, make sure you're starting with the science passages. If you're better at literature passages, make sure you're starting with the literature passage. You want your weakest passage to be the one you do last. So answer the questions in the order they appear in each passage. So that means that, for example, if your passage is the first passage, don't start with question 5, start with question 1. Skip any questions you feel very unsure of after 30 seconds, write star them in your test booklet, then come back to them at the end when you have time. Once again, try not to skip more than 3 questions per passage, because if you're skipping more than 3 questions per passage, then it's going to cause inefficiency, because you have to go back and forth between different passages. Coming back at the end and trying to answer too many questions at the end is going to be an issue as well. Okay, so if you read through a question a second time and you still don't know what it's asking though, skip it, come back to it at the end. So those are your guides for skipping questions, when to skip, how many you should try to, you don't want to skip more than 3 per passage obviously, but yeah, that's your ideal strategy there. As far as things to check in the final minutes, once again, obviously first priority, any questions you haven't answered, you need to answer them. You want to answer every question on any part of the SAT because you don't get penalized for wrong answer choices. Any questions you're unsure of is the next priority after the ones you haven't answered. At that point, if you're taking SAT pencil paper, make sure that you make that your test booklet matches your bubble sheet. You don't want to be off by one and then have a whole series of the rest of your answers all off by one question. So you want to take about 1 minute to check that. It shouldn't take too long. And then after that, you're just checking as many questions as you can. So hopefully this pacing is helpful. I think that if you follow, it's going to be really beneficial. Particularly, try to make sure that you have this pacing of the math, no calculator and with calculator, sort of memorized or down so you understand how to use it, because it's going to help you maximize your scoring potential in the math sections. I think that's really helpful. Same thing with the reading section. As far as understanding, you want to start with your easiest passages. So try to decide what your best passages are today so you know tomorrow going into the SAT where to start for the reading section. So that takes care of the pacing for today, and with that, let's go ahead and get into the next part of today's video. Questions 32 to 41 are based on the following passages. Passage 1 is adopted from Edmund Burke, titled Reflections on the Revolution in France, originally published in 1790. Passage 2 is adopted from Thomas Paine, titled The Rights of Man, originally published in 1791. So since this is a two-passage problem, what I'll do is I'll read the first passage first. I'll answer the questions that are related to the first passage only. Then I'll read the second passage and answer those questions related to the second passage. And then after that, answer the questions that are related to both of them. So passage 1, to avoid the evils of inconsistency and versatility 10,000 times worse than those of obstinacy and the blindest prejudice, we have consecrated the state that no man should approach to look into its defects or corruptions with due caution, that he should never dream of beginning its reformation by its subversion, that he should approach to the faults of the state as to the wounds of a father with pious awe and trembling solicitude. By this wise prejudice, we are taught to look with horror on those children of their country who are prompt rashly to hack that aged parent in pieces and put him into the kettle of magicians, in hopes that by their poisonous weeds and wild incantations they may regenerate the paternal constitution and renovate their father's life. Society is indeed a contract. Subordinate contracts for objects of mere occasional interest may be dissolved at pleasure, but the state ought not to be considered as nothing better than a partnership agreement in a trade of pepper and coffee, calico or tobacco, or some other such low concern, to be taken up for a little temporary interest, and to be dissolved by the fancy of parties. It is not to be looked upon with other reverence, because it is not a partnership in things subservient only to the gross animal existence of a temporary and perishable nature. It is a partnership in all science, a partnership in all art, a partnership in every virtue, in all perfection. As the end of such a partnership cannot be obtained in many generations, it becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living and those who are dead, those who are to be born. The municipal corporations at the universal kingdom are not morally at liberty at their pleasure, and their speculations of a contingent improvement wholly to separate and tear asunder the bands of their subordinate community, and to dissolve it into an unsocial, uncivil, unconnected chaos of elementary principles. All right, so that's the end of passage 1. So at this point, I'll go ahead and answer the questions related to passage 1. So we have question 32. We have, in passage 1, Burke indicates that a contrast between a person and a society differs from other contracts mainly in what? Well, we know that in that passage, or that first passage, what he's really doing is he's talking about how other contracts, they are less serious, right? So we look at option D. The other contracts that aren't with the government, between people and society, they aren't as serious, and they also are less permanent. Okay, we can see where he makes that comparison if we go up. I believe I highlighted this. We talk about how such partnerships cannot be obtained in many generations, right? Therefore, they last a very, very long time. They're between those who are living, those who are dead, and those who to be born. So that shows it's permanent, right? It lasts many generations. We also see that it's not of a low concern up here. So we know that it's important, it's serious, and it's also permanence. So our answer there would be D, serious and permanent. That's what makes it differ between other contracts. Okay, as used in line 4, state most nearly refers to what? So we have line 4, the word is state. Let's go take a look at what that's going to refer to. So we have line 4. Okay, we have, to avoid the evils of inconsistency and versatility 10,000 times worse than those of obstinacy and the blindest prejudice, we have consecrated the state. Okay, I know that in this case we're referring to something to do with the government and politics, that no man should approach to look into its defects or corruptions, but with due caution. So in this case, state is really referring to a political entity. We're not talking about position in life or a temporary condition or a style of living. We need to be talking about something to do with government and with politics. In this case, political entity would be correct. So our answer for 33 would be D. All right, well, now we got question 34. We have as used in line 22, low most nearly means what? Well, let's go take a look at line 22. We have or some other such low concern. Okay, in this case, we'd be looking at something like an insignificant concern or a petty concern, something that shows that it's not really worth worrying over. So we don't have the word insignificant, but we do have the word petty. We wouldn't describe it as weak concern or an inadequate concern or a depleted concern. We would describe it as a petty concern or something that's not significant. So answer there would be A for 34. 35, it can be most recently inferred from passage 2. Okay, I see now I'm referring to passage 2, so at this point I read passage 2. So I'll go up, it's going to be on our screen right here. We have every age and generation must be as free to act for itself in all cases as the ages and generations which preceded it. The vanity and presumption of governing before the grave is the most ridiculous and insolent of all tyrannies. Man has no property in man, neither has any generation a property in the generations which are to follow. The Parliament or the people of 1688 or of any other period had no more right to dispose of the people of the present day or to bind or to control them in any shape whatsoever than the Parliament or the people of the present day have to dispose of, bind, or control those who are to live 100 or 1,000 years hence. Every generation is and must be competent to all purposes which its occasions require. It is to the living and not to the dead, so it's to the living and not to the dead that there are to be accommodated. When man ceases to be, his power and his wants cease with him, and having no longer any participation in the concerns of the world, he has no longer any authority in directing who shall be its governors, or how its government shall be organized, or how administered. Those who have quitted the world and those who are not yet arrived in it are as far remote from each other and are as the utmost stretch of mortal imagination can conceive. What possible obligation then can exist between them? What rule or principle can be laid down that two non-entities, the one out of existence and the other not in, and who never can meet in this world, that the one should control the other to the end of time? The circumstances of the world are continually changing, the opinions of men change also, and as government is for the living and not for the dead, it is the living only that has any right in it. That which may be thought right and found convenient in one age may be thought wrong and found inconvenient in another. In such cases, who is to decide, the living or the dead? Okay, at this point, we can answer the questions relating to passage 2. So we have 35. It can be most reasonably inferred from passage 2 that Paine views historical precedent as what? Well, he's saying historical precedents don't matter to the people who are currently living, because those who are dead, they have no stake in what's going on now because it's not involving them. It does not concern them. It does not affect them. So we're going to look for an answer choice that discusses that. So we have option A, generally helpful to those who want to change society. No, he's not saying it's generally helpful to those who want to change society. B, surprisingly difficult for many people to comprehend. Also incorrect. C, frequently responsible for human progress. No. D, largely irrelevant to current political discussions. Yes. He says what occurred in the past and what people who are dead thought does not matter now because it doesn't affect them. So the answer there would be D. All right, now we get question 36. How would Paine most likely respond to Burke's statement in lines 30 to 34 from passage 1? Well, let's take a look at that statement. So it's lines 30 to 34. We have, as the ends of such a partnership cannot be obtained in many generations, it becomes a partnership not only between those who are living, but between those who are living, dead, and unborn. Okay, well, that's saying that that partnership or that agreement exists across generations. And we know in passage 2, which is the passage where Paine is making his argument, we know that we absolutely disagree with that. So we're going to look for something that shows disagreement. So we have option A. He would assert that the notion of a partnership across generations is less plausible to the people of his era than to the people of the past. The problem with this is that he's saying it's less plausible to those of his era than those in the past. That's what makes that wrong. B. He would argue that there is no politically meaningful links between the dead, the living, and the unborn. Yes, that would be his argument there. He believes that there is no agreement between the two or no meaningful links between those groups because only one is actually living in that moment and only one has those things affect them. So the correct answer there would be option B. All right, now we got question 37. So we've got 37. Which choice provides the best evidence to the previous question? Okay, that one's easy because we already have a good idea of where that's going to be at. That's going to be towards the end of the second passage because obviously it would be in passage 2 because we're responding to passage 1. And that's going to be where we talk about how we have right here where we have this highlighted portion from right around, looks like 67 to right around 72. What possible obligation then can exist between them? So he's saying that there's no meaningful links between them. What rule or principle can be laid down that two non-entities, that one out of existence, the other not in, who can never meet in this world should control each other to the end of time? So that's 67 to 72 would be our best evidence there. We see that's option D for 37, so that would be our answer there because that's showing there's no meaningful links between them. Okay, 38, which choice best describes how Burke would most likely have reacted to Paine's arguments in the final paragraph of passage 2. When we know in the final paragraph of passage 2, Paine is arguing that there's really obviously no meaningful links between the three groups. He's arguing that the government is for the living, not for the dead, not for the people who are to come. Only the living has any right in it. So how would the author of passage 1 respond to that? Well, he wouldn't agree with it, okay, so we can get rid of with approval. Now, we wouldn't say with skepticism because he would obviously disagree with it. We also wouldn't say with resignation, so our answer would have to be D. He would respond with disapproval because changing conditions are not a sufficient justification for changing the form of government. And we hear the author of passage 1 say that as well, so that also supports it. But he would definitely respond with disapproval, so our answer there would be D for 38. All right, 39, which choice provides the best evidence to the previous question? Okay, we know that that's going to be, if we scroll up here, that's going to be right here where we talk, and it looks like right around 30 to 34, I believe. Let me see if that was, I think it might have been 34 to 38. That was our only option around there. Okay, our only option around there is 34 to 38. So let me take a look at that. Okay, I always look at the highlighted portions first because generally those are things that are important, so they're generally evidence. But let's take a look at this. The municipal corporations of that universal kingdom are not morally at liberty at their pleasure and on their speculations of a contingent improvement, wholly to separate and tear asunder the bands of the subordinate community and to dissolve it into an unsocial, uncivil, connected chaos of elementary principles. Okay, the key part here in 34 to 38 that's going to make it correct is because we talk about how people in the present can't speculate on contingent improvement, right? Because they can't separate and tear asunder the bands of the subordinate community or the previous community. So what it's saying here is it's saying that those who are living now, they can't speculate on something improving and use that as justification to end what occurred in the past. So our correct answer there would be those lines 34 to 38. All right, question 40, which choice best states the relationship between the two passages? Well, we know passage 2 is challenging that primary argument of passage 1. Passage 2 is saying that there is no link between those three groups, the present, the dead, and the unborn. So passage 2 is definitely challenging that. So 40 answer there would be A. 41, the main purpose of both passages is to do what? Both passages, they're both talking about that relationship between people and government. They're not suggesting a way to resolve a particular political struggle. They're not evaluating a consequence of rapid political change. And they're not describing duties government have to their citizens. They're discussing a relationship between people and their government. All right, so now we can go ahead and move on. We've got our next passage. So that concludes the SAT reading passage. Now let's go ahead and get started with grammar rules. I'll try to get through all of these in right around 15 minutes. So keep in mind it's going to be a little bit quick, so try to pay close attention. So let's go ahead and get started. So grammar rules. First one we're going to talk about is agreement between subjects and verbs in number. Okay, so if we have a singular noun, we need to have a singular verb. For example, if we have Joseph, we must have jumps, okay, because we need the singular jumps verb to match the singular subject Joseph. If we have Joe and John, we have to have jump, okay, because that's maintaining that plural number. Now keep in mind, a way you can test this is with the he and they method, right? So if we say he, we would say he runs, which means we have an S there. If we're going to have a plural verb and we didn't know what the plural verb was, we know plural noun is they, we would say they run, thus run is the plural verb. Okay, so that's a trick you can use as he and they. Now, watch out for collective nouns. Collective nouns refer to a collection of individuals or singular subjects, and they group them into one singular subject. An example is Congress. We would say Congress is going to dismiss. Okay, Congress there is acting singular as a collective noun, so it needs a singular verb is. Okay, don't let prepositional phrases fool you. Okay, prepositional phrases, what do they look like? Okay, examples would be of clarinet players. That's prepositional phrase. We ignore prepositional phrases when determining the number of our subject and number of our verb. Another prepositional phrase would be with the most basketball players. Okay, we ignore that. So we would have group, which we know is singular, and then we would have is, okay? Group acting there as a collective noun as well. Okay, if we were to say the band, once again, acting as a collective noun is singular, and the band is very loud. So once again, we need that singular verb there, okay? So watch out for prepositional phrases, watch out for collective nouns. Pronouns, examples, he, she, they, that, those. Okay, those are going to be pronouns. Rules, it has to be clear who or what the pronoun is referring to. The number of the pronoun must agree with its subject. So, examples, we have John is a fast runner. Okay, John obviously is the subject here. Then our pronoun would be he goes on a long run every day. Okay, that right there, we have singular and singular. Okay, also matching gender there as well. Jason and John, that's plural. Okay, we would also have to have they as our pronoun there, also plural. An incorrect example would be Jason and Joe run every day and he gets tired a lot. We don't know who he is. Is it Jason or is it Joe? It's unclear who's being referred to, therefore that one is wrong. Okay, now let's talk about another incorrect example. We have the computers of students in Poland are newer than that of students in New York. Okay, here's what's wrong with that. The computers of students in Poland, we know computers here is plural. Okay, of students in Poland we ignore because it's a prepositional phrase, are newer than blank of students in New York. Once again, ignore the prepositional phrase. We need to have plural here. That's singular. We need plural. Therefore, we'd have to have those. Okay, so once again, making sure we're matching those numbers. All right, correct example, obviously computers of students in Poland are newer than those of students in New York. Another thing here, making sure that we're comparing things with the same number, right? Comparing things properly. That's another thing we need to watch out for in the writing section. Types of sentences, you've got your simple sentence, they have one subject, one verb. Compound sentence, two subjects, two verbs. Compound complex, two independent clauses and one independent clause, at least one independent clause. We're not going to spend too much time on that today. That was more for explaining other concepts, which we're going to go on to talk about now. So comma splices, right? You need to know this for the SAT writing section. Comma splices, they're basically run-on sentences, right? You use a comma where you would need to have a comma and a fanboy, right? The fanboys are for, and, nor, but, or, so, and yet. Those are your fanboys. So you can use a comma and a fanboy to connect two independent clauses. You can also use a semicolon. Okay, so a comma splice is where you don't use either of those. You only have a comma with no fanboy for two independent clauses, and that's incorrect. All right, moving on, we've got modifiers. Let's talk about modifiers. So they modify subjects and other words to give a better description or a more in-depth description. Keep in mind with modifiers, they have to be placed directly next to what they modify. That's the key part with modifiers. So let's go over an example. A correct example would be the world's brightest mathematician, comma, Jim Simons is a genius. You see how it's directly next to who it's modifying. Okay, it's modifying Jim Simons. Since in this case it's an introductory modifier, we have a comma after it. Now, what if we said Jim Simons, comma, the world's brightest mathematician is a genius? Once again, the modifier here would be the world's brightest mathematician. We offset it with commas to describe Jim Simons, which comes right next to it, in before it, right? So that one also is correct. An incorrect example would be Jim Simons is a genius, comma, the world's brightest mathematician. We see that there's a gap between our subject and our modifier, thus that is incorrect. We would have to rephrase that saying the world's brightest mathematician, comma, Jim Simons, or this other option here. So either of those first two would be correct, last one there would be incorrect. All right, let's talk about context. So words in the passage must make sense based on the context in which they appear. That means you need to read the passage to understand that context. Obviously, this type of passage reading differs from the way you read the reading section. I talked about that today already. Now let's go ahead and get into, we're going to skip the examples because like I said, today we're just trying to review common homophones. It might be a good idea. Hopefully when I talked about this on, I believe it was day 2 or day 1, you went through, you found the ones you knew, didn't know, and looked those up. If you haven't yet, you should probably go look those up. But let's go ahead and keep reviewing, okay? Because I'm not going to take time to go through all of those. Hopefully you already did that. Parallelism, like I said, these should be easy points for you. You shouldn't have to worry too much about it. Just make sure you're paying attention for it. If you pay attention for it, these should be easy points for you to get. So parallelism, you want to pay attention to verb tenses, order of nouns, adjectives, and the verbs. They have to remain the same or parallel between two different phrases, right? Noun phrases have to be parallel. An example, Haley likes to run, jump, and swim. We have to have that same tense of the verb in run, jump, and swim. Same thing, Haley enjoys running, jumping, and swimming. Have to have that same ending there, right? Same tense. Another example, Jason likes riding his bike, reading his book, and driving his car. We have a verb, and then we have a possessive pronoun, and then we have an object in all three of those phrases there. Okay, so we want to pay attention to parallelism. Anytime that we see a series or a list or anything like that, we want to look for parallelism in that. Okay, so any answer choice that contains a list that includes verbs, especially if you have a list that includes verbs, it's potentially a parallelism question, and it probably is, so you need to make sure you look for parallelism actively. Correlative conjunctions. These are used to connect words that are equally important to a sentence's meaning. Example would be the car I bought was both fast and small. Okay, the correlative conjunctions there are both and. Okay, we have a list here. We have both and, either or, just as, so, neither nor, not only but also, at once and, no sooner than, if then, rather than. Okay, so those are some examples of correlative conjunctions. Go ahead and take a look over that. I'll give you about 10 seconds. Okay, now let's go ahead and keep going. So, being concise, right? This is huge on the SAT writing section. I can't stress this enough. Be concise in word choice, be efficient in word choice, never repeat things unnecessarily, and avoid redundancy at all costs. If you can avoid redundancy and repetition on the SAT writing section, you will do so much better. Okay, you gotta avoid redundancy and repetition on the SAT writing section. Don't repeat information that has already been said. Okay, use modifiers to avoid repeating the same word twice. If you have one word at the end of a sentence and one word at the beginning of the sentence, one strategy you can use, you're going to be asked to combine the sentences more than likely. Get rid of the one starting a sentence, right? So let's say we have a word here. We'll say it was Joe Jones, right? And Joe Jones ended this sentence right here. Joe Jones. Okay, and you're asked to combine these sentences, right? It's underlined. Then what you want to do is you want to look to get rid of this part right here. put a comma here and put the word who, okay? So keep in mind that applies to places and other subjects as well. So anytime I see I have that situation where I have the same thing ending one sentence and starting the other and I'm asked to combine them, what I'm going to look to do is put a comma where the period is, get rid of whatever was right there as far as the thing that was repeated, and use who or what or when or where, okay, in order to get rid of repeating that word. Okay, so that's one strategy I'll use as well. But either way, just make sure you're avoiding repetition and redundancy. You want to make sure you do that. Don't be redundant. Use good diction. Have a precise word choice. Don't repeat things. Okay, if you see something such as annually and every year, make sure you get rid of one of those. All right, idioms. So idioms questions, right? The strategy here is basically what would you naturally say, especially if you're someone who spoke English their whole life and you're really, really comfortable with it. That's what you want to do, is you just want to think, what would you naturally say, okay? So some examples from practice tests are wait for, serve as a means of, and in order to be. Right? If you want to look up some common SAT idioms, it'd be a good idea, especially the day before the SAT, which is obviously today. Especially if you're someone who English isn't their first language, I would definitely recommend looking up some common SAT idioms before you take your test tomorrow. Just look over them for like 5 minutes if you can. I think it'd be helpful. All right, next up, let's keep moving. So we've got colons, em dashes, and apostrophes are what we're going to talk about now. So colons, they have to have an independent clause before it. We know an independent clause is a subject and a verb. What comes after a colon gives examples, explains, or illustrates what came before it. So some functions of a colon. It can be used to introduce a list. It can be used to connect two independent clauses, but only when the second independent clause is illustrating or explaining the idea in the first. Okay, another reason we can use a colon is for emphasis. So in that case, it's similar to an em dash, but we would usually prefer an em dash for emphasis. So that's just one thing to note, but a colon can be used for it. Okay, so let's talk about the em dash now. Em dash, its three main purposes are what? Well, its three main purposes are indicating non-essential information, right? So we know with non-essential information, we can take it out of the sentence and the sentence will still be a full sentence on its own, right? It would be an independent clause. It makes perfect sense. So we can remove the information that's non-essential. Now, the non-essential information we can remove has to be set off with either em dashes, comma, or parentheses. Those are our three options, okay? So you can use an em dash to do that, or commas, or parentheses. Okay, what about an em dash for emphasis? Okay, you can use an em dash for emphasis as well. We could say there is only one Los Angeles Lakers player to trust with the last shot, em dash Kobe Bryant. Okay, you can also use an em dash for abrupt changes in thought. So for example, if I said I should write an essay on Thanksgiving, no, on business ethics. That's an abrupt change in thought. We use that em dash there. Okay, now let's talk about apostrophes. So apostrophes, you can have possessives. For example, John's car. Obviously, anytime that someone owns something, you want to use that apostrophe. Now, what if we had a plural subject? For example, the Lakers, the basketball team, right? We've got the Lakers, it is their court. Okay, Lakers has that S there, so we want to put that apostrophe after that S then, since it's their court. Contractions, obviously we have contractions where we have to use an apostrophe as well, such as it is or they are when we use their. And then we got parentheses. Parentheses are used for non-essential information like I already talked about. So if you can take it out and the sentence still makes sense, then obviously it's going to be non-essential and you should put parentheses, commas, or em dashes to set it off. Keep in mind you can't mix them up. You can't use a parentheses and an em dash. If you're going to use parentheses, it's got to be parentheses on both sides. If you're going to use an em dash, it's got to be em dash on both sides. Comma's got to be a comma on both sides as well. Okay, some random other stuff that you should know. So avoid casual language on the SAT writing section. Try to maintain an academic tone. Avoid slang as well. Understand relationships between ideas. So a lot of times you'll be asked to put in a transition word at the beginning of the sentence. If you see one word at the beginning of a sentence with a comma after it and it's underlined, make sure that you understand you're looking to transition between the previous sentence or paragraph to your next sentence. Okay, so understand that. So what you want to do then is you want to skip reading over that underlined word and read your next sentence that you have to connect to that previous sentence, figure out how they're related, and then use that to understand which transition word you want to pick. So for example, if you want to contrast, you'd use a word like in contrast with a comma after it, or however with a comma after it. If you were looking at similarities, you could use not unlike. Yes, that was a correct answer on a practice test for showing something that was similar. You could also use the word like. For differences, you could use unlike. For digressions, right, for something like I digress or something like that, you could say nevertheless. Some contradictions, right? So you could say, well, someone argued for this bill. He did not fulfill his constitutional duty. So with a contradiction, if you're going to use the word well, understand you don't put the comma after well like that. You would put it after the phrase, right? So the phrase here would be, well, Johnson argued for the bill, comma, right? And if you see that at the beginning of the sentence, if you see you have when, well, or any other subordinating conjunction or because at the beginning of a sentence, If you see you have any words like those at the beginning of the sentence, you have to have a comma at the end of that dependent clause. Okay, so understand that. All right, emphasis. So if you're looking at a transition to be emphasizing something, you could use furthermore or moreover. Those are two good ones. And like I said, correct relationships trumps awkwardness, such as in not unlike on that question on the practice test, you had to show that the two sentences were expressing similarities, and the only option was not unlike. All the other options express differences. So even though normally we would say like instead of not unlike, we got to understand that the correct relationship between sentences would trump any awkwardness like that. Okay. All right, such as, let's talk about such as. So if such as is, if we want to place a comma before such as and after each item in a list if such as is non-restrictive. Okay, if it's non-restrictive, then we want to have a comma before such as. So if we take a look at our example here, there are lots of types of fruits, comma, such as apples, oranges, and bananas. Are there more fruits than that? Yes. Thus it is non-restrictive. It's not restricted to just those three fruits. Thus we put a comma before such as. Another way you can tell it's non-restrictive is if you ignored all of this, if the sentence still makes sense, because then it'd be there are a lot of types of fruits, period. That still makes sense. Now, as far as restrictive ones, okay, some restrictive ones would be this. Let's say we said sports such as baseball and football involve a ball. How do we know it's restrictive? Well, there are more sports, or I'm sorry, how do we know that it's restrictive? We know that it's restrictive because there are sports that don't involve a ball, okay? So in this case, we are restricting the sports to just baseball and football because there are sports that don't involve a ball, like track and field, swimming and diving. So if we were to take out such as baseball and football, we would have sports involve a ball, which is a false statement since there are sports that don't involve a ball. So that would be an indication of a restrictive one. Okay, dependent clause is subjects. Okay, so this one's good. So this one right here is probably going to show up not that often on the SAT writing section, but we'll quick touch on it anyways. So dependent clauses acting as the subject of a sentence. That can happen. For example, the fact that the New York Knicks have not won a championship in 10 years is extremely disappointing to me. In this case, the prepositional phrase that the New York Knicks have not won a championship in 10 years can be ignored when determining the number of our subject and our verb, and we would go back to the fact, which we know is singular, thus our verb would have to be singular. So understand that it can act as the subject of a sentence. A dependent clause can. Okay, who versus whom and who versus that. This is the last thing we're going to talk about for the grammar rules today. All right, so the key thing that you need to know is the trick with it. So the trick is this. If I works in place of the pronoun, then who should be used. If me works in place of the pronoun, then whom should be used. That's the key thing you need to understand here. So an example, all of the students who are able to jump 25 inches will receive an A in the class. Okay, in this case we would take out who, in this case we could say I am able to jump 25 inches. Since we use I there, we use who. Another example, all the students whom teachers despise will receive an F. Okay, in this case, what if we said teachers despise me? Okay, since we would use me there, we want to use whom. Okay, so that's your indication. We wouldn't say teachers despise I, we would say teachers despise me, thus we would use whom. Okay, so that's going to be your trick there for understanding when to use who versus whom. Who is the pronoun that is used for people or a person, and that is the pronoun that's used for anything that's not a person or people. Okay, all right, so that covers our grammar rules. Now let's go ahead and do a practice writing passage as our next step in today's lesson. So let's get started with this passage. It's going to be the third passage from SAT Practice Test 6. As I go through, I'll be giving you answer explanations, showing you what I look for, and I'll basically be going through it pretty much about the same pace as I would if I were taking the SAT. Obviously, I got to give verbal answer explanations, so that'll slow me down a little bit, but overall, it shouldn't make a big impact. Let's go ahead and get started. All right, so we have the physician assistant will see you now. We're asked which choice is the best introduction to the paragraph. Obviously, we need to know what our paragraph talks about, so let's read on. Well, the pressures of an aging population, insurance reforms, and health epidemics have increased demand for care. The supply of physicians is not expected to keep pace. Okay, keep pace in this situation is an academic tone. It's maintaining that academic tone. Maintain the tempo, get in line, and move along. All are not an academic tone, thus answer choice A is correct. The Association of American Medical Colleges predicts a shortage of over 90,000 physicians by 2020. By 2025, that number could climb to more than 130,000. In some parts of the country, shortages are already a sad fact of life. A 2009 report by the Bureau of Health Professions notes that although a fifth of the U.S. population lives in rural areas, less than a tenth of U.S. physicians serves that population. Because of the traditional response to the crisis, and then we have amping up versus bolstering versus arousing versus revving up, amping up, and arousing. Once again, none of those maintain an academic tone. Bolstering does, and it also provides the correct definition for what they want to do to these medical college enrollments. They want to bolster them or increase them and expand physician training programs. They say that response is too slow and costly to address the near-term problem. Alternatives are being explored. One promising avenue has been greater reliance on physician assistants. So, key thing that we want to do to introduce this paragraph is the fact we have a shortage of physicians. Option A, the term paramedics refers to healthcare workers who provide routine and clinical services. No. B, for many Americans, finding a physician is likely to become a growing challenge. Yes, because we go on to explain that that's because there's a shortage of physicians. So B will be our correct answer there. All right, moving on. We've answered 23, 24, and 25. Now we've got 26. At this point, the writer is considering adding the following sentence. It better connect to my previous sentence in that last paragraph. Several factors are in favor of such an expanded role. That expanded role is for these physician assistants, which we are arguing for greater reliance on, as we see. So that's a good transition. We should add it there. Okay, now let's go ahead and make sure that this paragraph, though, before we decide for sure if we're going to add it, that this paragraph does talk about these several factors. Okay, so we have by virtue of their medical training, PAs, okay, in this case, they possess that medical training, so we have to use their, THEIR. We go and find that, we see that that's going to be answer choice C, so C will be our answer for 27. Obviously, it's plural since it's PAs, plural. Can perform many of the jobs traditionally done by doctors, including treating chronic and acute conditions, performing minor surgeries, that has to be a comma there, and prescribing some medication. So it should be a comma after there because we have a list of 3 things. So we need surgeries, comma. We don't need a comma after and. C is wrong, B is wrong, A is wrong. Correct answer is D. All right, moving on. We got still question 26 that we have to keep in the back of our mind. We've got prescribing some medications. However, although well compensated, earning in 2012, I'm guessing this is going to deal with a graph. Let's take a look. No, we aren't dealing with a graph. Okay, so although well compensated, okay, that has to refer to the PAs here, which means I know I have a non-essential phrase or clause. I see I close it out with a comma there, so I would have to have although well compensated, I need to have a comma then before earnings or some other way to show that it's non-essential. So we have option B, option C, and option D. Okay, so option C, one thing I noticed right away, I see I don't have a comma after that one, so that one's going to be wrong because we don't close off that non-essential. Option D, we see that we use a colon there. Once again, that's incorrect. We have to use either parentheses, dashes, or commas in order to do this. I see in option B, I use parentheses. Looking at option A, I see that I don't have that comma there. So I don't have a comma after compensated, so that one's wrong as well. Thus, I must use these parentheses. So my answer there is going to be B for 29. Okay, now going back, 26. Have we provided several factors yet? Pretty much. We can keep reading on, though, just to make sure. They provide a lot. PA's cost to healthcare is less than physicians do. Who might otherwise undertake these tasks. Moreover, the training period for PAs is markedly shorter than that for physicians. How do I know that? It has to be singular. Okay, key thing here is it has to be singular, just like training period for PAs is singular. Training period is singular. We have to maintain this for as well. Thus, we would say that for. We wouldn't say that compared with because we want to maintain parallelism. Thus, our answer for 30 is going to be C. Okay, and then we have markedly shorter than that for physicians, 2 to 3 years versus 7 to 11. Okay, at this point, we know that we have argued for those several factors. Thus, we do want to add this sentence. We can get rid of our nose. We want to add it not because it introduces a counter argument, but because it frames the point the paragraph will examine. So our answer will be B for that question. All right, now we got 31, so we got to get down there. Physicians already offer vital primary care in many locations. Some 90,000 PAs were employed nationwide in 2012. Over and above their value and partially compensating for the general physician shortage has been their extraordinary contribution to rural healthcare. A recent study of the scholarly literature by Texas researchers found that PAs lend cost-efficient, widely appreciated services in underserved areas. Okay, I know that sentence. I see I have one word beginning a sentence with a comma after it, underlined, looking to transition to my next sentence. Rural-based PAs provide a broader spectrum of such services than do their urban and suburban counterparts, possibly as a consequence of the limited pool of rural-based physicians. Okay, now is that in addition to what came before it? Absolutely. Okay, it's not a causal relationship, which was what thus would indicate. It's not anything contrasting with despite this, and it's not anything contrasting with on the other hand. Okay, this is in addition to that. So thus our answer for 31 would be A. All right, increasingly, PAs and other such medical practitioners have become critical complement to physicians. 2013 report estimates that while the number of primary care physicians will increase slowly from 2010 to 2015, number of physician assistants and nurse practitioners will grow at much faster rates. At this point, should we add the following sentence? So we have, in fact, according to the data presented in the table, physician assistants will likely outnumber physicians by 2025. Key things when I'm adding a sentence are A, is it accurate according to the data in the table or graph? And then B, also, does it help the argument here and does it add to the paragraph? So let's take a look at if it's accurate according to the graph first. So physician assistants outnumbering physicians by 2025. I see physicians are going to be 216,000, physician assistants only 42,000. Thus, answer there is no, we're not going to add that sentence. Okay, no, because it's not accurate according to the data. So answer there is C for 32. Number 33, both by merit and by necessity, PAs are likely to greet more patients. This is the wrong patients. That's the homophone question. Okay, so it should be patients spelled like this. So A, B are wrong. Okay, and then we have another homophone question with then versus than. In this case, since we're comparing two different subjects, we're going to use THAN. Our answer is going to be D. Okay, so you can see that I closed out that passage. It took me right around 6 minutes, which is perfectly in line with the pacing that we'd want, right? Even a little bit quick, especially because I'm giving verbal answer explanations as I go through. At this point, I just go through. Let's just make sure I answered all my questions for this passage. It looks like I have. Okay, so all the ones I had to come back to, I did indeed go back to. So hopefully this writing section was helpful. I tried to give good answer explanations as I went through. Hopefully you saw what I was looking for, saw how I identified question types, things like that. So yeah, use those strategies as far as identifying the question type, getting rid of wrong answer choices just like I did, and you should be very efficient on the SAT writing section. So let's move into the next part of today's video. Alright, so let's go through the math formulas and equations you need to know for the SAT. So I'll be moving a bit quicker through this one since it is the day before the SAT and we're just kind of reviewing them. So let's go ahead and get started. Slope-intercept form, obviously that's going to be y equals mx plus b, slope being m, y-intercept being whatever your b value is. If it was minus a number, then obviously your y-intercept would be negative. Vertex form, that's going to be for an equation that's set up such as 9x squared plus 2x plus 1. Right, that would be an example of an equation, and that equation, if it was in vertex form, would look something like this: y equals a times the quantity x minus j squared plus h, where your vertex then is going to be at j and h. Okay, understand that your vertex would be at j and h, so pay attention to that minus sign there. That's important. Distance formula, that's going to be equal to the square root of your rise squared plus your run squared, or in other words, the x, your second x coordinate minus your first x coordinate, that value squared, plus the difference between your second y coordinate and your first y coordinate squared, and then that's all obviously square rooted. Quadratic formula, right? A couple of things here. We'll cover the quadratic formula, and then we'll also cover the remainder theorem here as well. Quadratic formula is going to be x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Another example here we could use, that's for a parabola such as 9x squared plus 2x plus 1. That could be an example of the parabola. In that case, your a value is going to be 9, your b value would be 2, c value would be 1. All right, now let's go ahead and talk about, we'll get to the remainder theorem in 1 minute here. Let's talk about b squared minus 4ac. Okay, if b squared minus 4ac is greater than 0, you're going to have two real solutions, such as in this graph right here, which I'll put in red, right? I'll go ahead and square it in red. Okay, such as in this graph, that's your example for this one here. Next one, if your b squared minus 4ac value is equal to 0, you're going to have one real solution, such as in this graph that I'm squaring in blue. Now, what if your b squared minus 4ac value is less than 0? Then there's going to be no real solution, such as the graph in black. All right, now we've got our remainder theorem. Okay, our remainder theorem. Let's say that we have this top equation divided by x minus 2. So I'll go ahead and put this in red so you see what I'm talking about. Okay, we're dividing it by x minus 2. What you're going to do then, since you have x minus 2, is you take that 2 then, and you're going to plug it in for your x value in your numerator, right? So you do 2 then times 2 to the cubed, right? 2 to the third power, since that's what your x is, minus 5 times 2 squared, and then plus 4 times 2, and then plus that 3. Now, in this case, we know that that's going to equal 7. Thus, our remainder at the end has to be plus 7 over x minus 2. So you might end up with a couple options, right? A, B, C, and D. All right, A, B, C, D. Okay, and then you've got, they have a similar first part, but then at the end they all have different remainders. You can find your answer just by solving for the remainder, thus saving you time. That's why the remainder theorem is important, because it'll save you time. All right, exponents. Okay, let's cover exponents. If we have the same base, right, for example, x, and we're dividing, we're going to subtract. Okay, so that's this top example. I'll go ahead and square that one. So, example, we have x to the 22nd power over x to the 14th. That's the same as x to the power of the difference between 22 and 14, which is x to the 8th. Okay, if we have x to the third times x to the fourth, we're going to add those. So if we have the same base, then we can go ahead and add our exponents to get x to the 7th in this case. Now, what if we have a number to a power, right? As an example right here that I'll box up in blue, we have x to the third to the fourth power. In that case, you are multiplying, right? So you're going to have x to the power of 3 times 4, which will equal x to the 12th. Okay, next one. Let's say that we have x to the power of a negative exponent with a fraction, right? Also with fractions as exponents. Well, the negative means that you're going to have 1 over x to the power if it were positive. So in this case, you'd have 1 over x to the 1/2. X to the 1/2 means that you have the square root of x, right? So whatever your fraction is, let's say, for example, it's 2/3. If we have x to the 2/3, then what that means is we're going to have the third root of x squared. So the denominator of your fraction of your exponent is going to be whatever that root is, and the numerator is what is going to be the exponent of the variable inside of that root. Okay, the negative means that obviously it's going to be 1 over whatever it is, as shown in this example here of this x to the power of -2. That would be 1 over x squared. All right, so that's exponents. Now let's talk about some tricks we can use to save time. So the sum of perfect squares. If we have x plus j squared, I'll use blue here. Okay, if we have x plus j squared, we know that that's going to equal x squared plus 2xj plus j squared, right? We could rewrite that as x plus y squared as well. Okay, let's say that we have x plus y squared. We know that that's going to equal x squared plus 2xy plus y squared, right? Next up, we have the x minus j squared. Keep in mind that the variables are interchangeable, right? So it could be x minus y squared, whatever, same thing. You're going to have x squared minus 2x times j plus j squared. Once again, you can do the same thing with y's, right? X minus y squared. You're going to end up with then x squared and then minus 2xy, and then you're going to have a plus y squared as well there. So the only thing that changes is the sign of that middle term. All right, next up, we got the difference of perfect squares. So let's say we have x minus j times x plus j. We know that our middle term is going to cancel there, and we're going to have x squared minus j squared. So pay attention, once again, that could be written with y as well, right? So just pay attention to the fact that that middle term is going to cancel out, and you're also going to have that minus sign right there. All right, next up, we can also deal with this with imaginary numbers. Let's say we have h plus zi times h minus zi. Then what that means is that we know I squared is equal to -1. Thus, what we're going to have here is we're going to have h squared plus z squared. So how does that work? Well, this plus zi is going to get multiplied by this minus zi, and that's going to end up giving us minus z squared I squared, which we know I squared is -1. Thus, it changes that sign up front to a positive. Okay, and the middle term is going to cancel just like in the difference of perfect squares. So we'd have h squared plus z squared. All right, next up, let's talk exponential growth and decay. So the equation for exponential growth and decay is going to be y equals your starting amount times 1 plus or minus your growth or decay rate to the power of t, which is generally years. All right, so we've got, but they'll tell you what it is. So it's not always years. Pay attention. It could be a different variable, but they'll tell you what it is. All right, so let's say that we are decreasing by 50%. That's our rate. And let's say we start with 500. Then our equation would be y equals 500, 1 minus 0.5 squared. If we were doing it for 2 years, okay? So that's if we were doing it for 2 years. All right, next up, we've got the average and the mean, okay? Average and mean. So average is going to be the sum of all your terms divided by the number of terms. Your median is going to be your middle term, so you're just going to get rid of your low value, get rid of your high value, get rid of your next lowest, get rid of your next highest, get your median. Also, if you end up with a median where you have two numbers like this, in that case, what you're going to do is you're going to find the average of those two, and that'll be your median. So in this case, it would be 10. Okay, mode, that's the number that shows up most often in the set of data. So if this was our set of data right here, we know that our mode then would be 7 since it shows up more than any other number. Standard of deviation, all you really need to know, you don't need to know the equation, you just kind of got to be able to tell from a graph. So for example, the standard of deviation in this case of graph 2 is going to be greater than graph 1 because we see that we have an average right around it looks like right around 9 here, but we see that we have a lot more deviation from 9. We go all the way over to 2, all the way over to 15, and we still have 2 points there. Whereas over here with this average of 9, we are very, very concentrated around it, right? We see that as we go away from it, there are much, much less points. All right, and we also see that we've got financial models, okay, so some interest equations. We have simple interest, okay? Simple interest in this case is going to be your amount owed is going to equal your initial amount of your loan times your rate times time. Now keep in mind, if it's your total amount owed, you have to have that 1 there, okay? So if your rate was 5%, you'd have to have 1.05 if you're calculating your total amount owed. If you're calculating the amount of interest that has been added onto what you're owed, okay, then you would put a 0 there in front, so it'd be 0.05. So keep that in mind as well. All right, next up, compound interest. Your equation for that is going to be your total amount owed is going to equal your initial amount that you took out in your loan times 1 plus your interest rate over the number of times it's compounded per unit t, all raised to the power of the number of times it's compounded times t. Okay, so this one right here is probably one of the more difficult equations and formulas you need to know for the SAT math section. Keep in mind n is the number of times it's compounded per unit t. That's really important to understand here. Okay, so for example, the total amount owed if you took out an initial loan of $1,000 and you had your interest rate of 5% and you compounded it quarterly, which is 4 times per year, and you did this for 2 years, then you would have your n is 4 and your t would be 2 years. Okay, so that would be your equation there. All right, statistics. Let's talk statistics. So bias sampling. If you have a bias sample, you can't come to an accurate conclusion about your data. If you have a sample and you want it to be not biased, you better have random sampling. If you have random sampling, it's not likely that you're going to have a biased sample. You also should have random assignment, which means that you're not picking one trait and only giving people with that one trait, for example, a certain medicine and giving other people no medicine. You want to randomly assign all of the patients or treatment or groups. You want to assign that randomly the treatments to them. All right, geometry and trigonometry. Keep in mind, random assignment doesn't really show up that much on the SAT. It's more bias sampling and random sampling that you need to understand. Random assignment, that's more AP stats, but it could show up. That's why I explained it right there. Okay, geometry and trigonometry. So we got SOHCAHTOA, right? Obviously, we got sine, cosine, and tangent. So we've got our example triangle on our right here. We've got Z, J, and Q as our side lengths. We got angle X. The sine of X is obviously going to be our opposite over our hypotenuse. So we look at our opposite. We see that our opposite is going to be Q, and we see our hypotenuse is going to be J. Thus, the sine of X is going to be Q over J. Cosine of X, we know that that's Ka and SOHCAHTOA, so that's going to be our adjacent over our hypotenuse. Our adjacent obviously is going to be Z, hypotenuse J, Z over J. Tangent is going to be TOA, which is going to be our opposite over our adjacent. We see that our opposite is going to be Q and our adjacent is going to be Z, thus we're going to have Q over Z. Okay, next thing we need to understand, Pythagorean theorem, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. In this case, our hypotenuse is 10. We see that we have a side length of 8, and we wanted to solve for x. Thus, we're going to do 10 squared as our c squared, since c is our hypotenuse. Side length is 8, so we do 100 there, minus 64 after we square each one. And we're going to be left with 36 equals x squared. Square root each side, we get x is 6. Some triangles that you should know to save time on the SAT are going to be the 3, 4, 5 triangle. If you have 3 as one side length, 4 as another side length, and it's a right triangle, you're going to have 5 as your hypotenuse. If you have a 5, 12, 13, let's say you have 13 as your hypotenuse, let's say you have 12 as a side length, your other side length must be 5. If you understand those, you're going to save some time on the SAT math section. Another equation you can use to save time is the fact that for an equilateral triangle, keep in mind an equilateral triangle is one where all the sides are the same length and all angles are going to be 60. Your equation for the area of it can be given by the area is equal to the square root of 3 times the side squared. Keep in mind all the sides are the same, so if you have 1, you have it, all over 4. Okay, if you can memorize that one, you could save time. I don't think that one is on the reference sheet, so if you can memorize that one, it'll save you time. Circles. Let's talk circles. The equation for a circle, x minus h squared plus y minus k squared equals r squared, where r is your radius. Your center is going to be at hk. Keep in mind we have this minus sign, right? So if we have x minus a number, then our center is going to be that number without that minus sign. If we have y minus a number, our center is going to be that number without that minus sign. What if we have y plus a number? If we have y plus a number, then we have to take the minus of that number in order to get our center. All right, moving on. Obviously, we've got our example there. Let's say we have x plus 3 squared plus y plus 2 squared. Obviously, we have to flip the sign since it's adding there, so our center would be negative 3 and negative 2 since we got to flip that sign. Okay, and then obviously our radius is going to be squared, so keep in mind, always pay attention to that fact that you have your radius squared. Make sure you square it. Okay, 360 degrees is equal to 2 pi radians. Let's say we're given our given some measurement in degrees and we have to convert it to radians. Once again, we use this canceling of units strategy, right? So we want to cancel these degrees. So we want to have a degree up top here and we want to get rid of it with the degree down there, right? So obviously those cancel. We'll be left with our answer in radians. When converting from degrees to radians, obviously we have to multiply by pi over 180 degrees, right? Pi radians over 180 degrees. When converting from radians to degrees, we want to multiply to cancel our radians, right? So we're going to have radians here. We got radians down here. We'll cancel them. We'll be left with degrees. So we want to multiply them by 180 degrees over our pi radians. Okay. All right, moving on. We got, obviously I talked about canceling units right there. Now let's talk circumferences. Okay, so the circumference of a circle is going to be 2 times pi times the radius, also known as the diameter times pi. All right, now what if we need the arc length, right? So we just want part of a circle, we just want part of its length, right? So the length here would be right along there. Our equation for that is going to be the number of degrees of that interior angle of that arc length over 360 times pi times our diameter, or 2 times our radius, whatever you want to use. Okay, now what if we have it in radians? Okay, let's say that we have that initial angle in there in radians. We can use that over 2 pi radians, since 2 pi radians are the measure of a full circle, and multiply that by pi times the diameter, or pi times 2 times the radius. Okay, once again, area. What if we want the area of a part of a circle, as in this example here? We take that 120 degrees, put it over 360 degrees, since that's the full degrees of a circle, and then we multiply by pi r squared, which is the formula for the area of a circle. We can do the same thing with radians as well. Okay, a polygon. What if we need the measure of an interior angle of a polygon, such as in blue and black here? Okay, what we're going to do is we're going to take our number of sides, we're going to subtract 2 from it and multiply by 180, then divide by the number of sides. So if we had, for example, a square, we'd have 4 sides minus 2 times 180 divided by 4. We see we end up with 90 degrees, which obviously is indeed the correct answer there. Okay, so that right there, it took us about 15 minutes. I do have one more thing I want to cover, so I'm going to quick add it in here. So what I want to add here is imaginary numbers. I want to quick touch on one thing with it. So if you have I, which is your imaginary number, to the power of 1, obviously that's going to equal I. Now, if you have I squared, then that's going to equal negative 1. Now, if you have I to the third is going to equal negative I. Okay, and I'll make that a 1 more obvious. Okay, and then I to the fourth, if you have I to the fourth power, then I to the fourth power is just going to equal 1. Now, keep in mind that this is also going to loop. So, if you have I to the fifth power, that's also going to equal I. If you have I to the sixth power, that's also going to equal negative 1. If you have I to the seventh power, then you're also going to have negative I. And if you have I to the eighth power, then you're going to have 1 as well. So you see that that's just going to loop every time you add 4, right? So if you have I to the ninth over here, you have I. If you have I to the 10th, you're going to have negative 1. If you have I to then you're going to have negative I. If you have I to the 12th, then once again, you're going to have 1. Okay, so just understand that that loops there. Okay, then that's going to take care of your imaginary numbers for you. So that takes us through our review of all the math formulas and equations. Now let's go ahead and get into some practice with the math no calculator section and then the math with calculator section. Alright, let's do a couple of the math no calculator section problems to get you in the zone and ready for tomorrow when you take your SAT. So, we've got the graph above shows the distance traveled D in feet by a product on a conveyor belt m minutes after the product is placed on the belt. Which of the following correctly relates D and M? We know M is our time and we know that D is our distance. So we have D and M. We can use our slope formula. We see for every change of 1m we go up 2D. Thus, D is going to equal 2m. Okay, we see we start at 0, so we're going to have no intercept there. So answer there is going to be A for number 2. Alright, moving on, let's go ahead and find another one. Keep in mind I did do some tips and tricks videos with these. That's why some of these questions are filled out. We're going to skip those because you've probably seen most of those problems and those tips and tricks I included in the 14-day series. So, question 4, we have RT equals TU. We're asked for the value of X. Once again, always remember to pay attention to what you're asked to answer with. So key things here, I talked about in one of the tip and trick videos. I don't know if I included it in the 14-day series, but I talk about identifying the angles you need to find your answer. In this case, since I need angle X, what I know is I can either get this angle and this angle to get X, or I can get this angle right here. Now, would I rather have to solve for 2 angles or 1 angle? I'd rather have to solve for 1 angle. So first thing I understand is that in order to get that angle there, I need to get my angle right here, okay? Because I know all of these angles in this triangle must add to 180. Okay, this angle here, and this angle here. Other thing I notice is I have an isosceles triangle with RT and UT since we're told those are the same. So I can take that 180 degrees of triangle RTU, I can subtract that 114 degree angle to leave me with 66 degrees to split over this angle here, which I'll put in red, and angle U. Okay, so these two angles, I got to split it over that. So I take that 66 divided by 2, that's going to give me 33. Okay, so now I know what my angle U is. I know that that's 33. So I can take 33 and add it to 31. Okay, so I'll take 33 plus 31. I know that that's going to give me 64. Now I do 180 minus 64. Okay, and now keep in mind, I don't even have to do actually 180 minus 64 because I know when I do that 180 minus 64 to get angle V right here, which I'll put in blue, okay, to get this angle right there, I know I'm just going to have to go ahead and then take that angle and subtract it from 180 again. So I know 64 already has to be angle X, right? Because I would do 180 minus that 64 to get V, but then I have to do 180 minus that angle V. Okay, so I'm just going to end up getting 64 either way. Thus, my answer there is going to be C for number 4. So key things here. I make sure that you're solving for the least number of angles you have to, right? So try to be efficient in that way. In this case, if I would have gone and I would have solved for, if I would have put down that 33 is this angle here, it wouldn't have helped me, okay? Because I don't need to know that angle to solve my problem. Key thing here is understanding that I want to solve for this angle right here, okay? This angle and then get to that angle. So solving for the least number of angles. Don't feel like you have to solve for every single angle if you're given a geometry problem. Only solve for the ones you need in order to get to your correct answer. So answer there is going to be C, 64. All right, let's go and find another problem that would be good for us to review. Okay, I see number 7. That one's going to be a really good one for us to review, and you'll see why as I go through it. Okay, first thing I'm going to do is I want to get this square root by itself. So I'm going to subtract 4 from each side. Okay, I got x plus 3 minus 4. That's going to be equal to x minus 1. So now I've got x minus 1 equals my square root, 2x plus 6. What do I need to do here? I want to get rid of my square root. How do I do that? I square each side. Okay, squaring each side, that's going to give me x squared minus 2x and then plus 1. That's going to equal 2x plus 6. All right, at this point, what I'm going to try to do is I'm going to try to set it equal to 0, then factor out and solve for what my x's can equal. So I'll go ahead and subtract 2x from each side, cancel that, and subtract 6 from each side, cancel that. Okay, so I got minus 6, I got minus 2x. Now I'm going to have 0 is equal to x squared minus 4x, and then I'm going to have 1 minus 6, which is going to give me minus 5. At this point, I go ahead and factor. I know I'm going to have x minus 4, x minus 5, and then I'm going to have x plus 1, okay, because I was looking for factors of negative 5 that add to negative 4. I know factors of negative 5 that add to negative 4 are going to be x minus 5 and then x plus 1. Thus, my possible solutions are going to be x equals 5 and x equals negative 1. Now, keep in mind they're possible solutions. I have to check them. 0 wasn't on there, so I get rid of d. I have to check these in my original problem, though, because I'm dealing with a square root. So let's plug negative 1 in. We have 2 times negative 1. That's going to give us negative 2. Negative 2 plus 6 is going to give us positive 4. Square root of 4 is going to be 2. Then we'd have 2 plus 6. And then we have, is 2 plus 6 equal to negative 1 plus 3? No, because negative 1 plus 3 is going to give me 2. Thus, negative 1 is not an answer choice. My correct answer here is going to be 5. Okay, that's my only possible answer there. So 7, answer there is going to be B. All right, so that takes us through another one. Keep in mind, if you're dealing with square roots like that, you always want to make sure you go back after you get your answers and check them. If you didn't check them, you're going to get number 7 wrong. That's why I wanted to choose that one, because I knew you had to go back and check it. So I wanted to show you an example of one where you do have to check it. All right, let's go and find another good problem that would be good to review. I see number 10. Number 10 is going to be dealing with 2 systems of equations and solving. So I want to do that one because that's one that's really common on the SAT math section. All right, so we have a group of 202 people went on an overnight camping trip, taking 60 tents with them. Some of the tents held 2 people each, and the rest held 4 people each. Okay, I'm going to call this one here F, and I'm going to call this one here T for 2 people. So we have 2 people, 4 people. I know that T plus F have to equal 60 since there's a total of 60 tents. The next thing I know is I know that 2 times T for 2-person tents plus 4 times F for 4-person tents, it has to hold 202 people. Okay, so assuming all the tents are filled to capacity and every person got to sleep in a tent, how many tents are 2-person tents? Okay, so now we just go ahead and solve. So key thing here is I want to solve for the variable that I want. So I want to solve for my number of 2-person tents, T. Thus what I want to do is I want to get rid of my F. So I want to get F in terms of T. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to subtract T from each side here, get rid of that, and I will see that F is equal to 60 minus T. Now I plug that in for F, and you see that I have 2T plus 4 times 60 minus T is equal to 202. All right, so at that point, I just go and distribute that 4 to the 60 and the minus T. I got 4 times 60 and then 4 times negative T. So I'm going to have 2T minus 4T, which I know is going to leave me with negative 2T. And then I'll have 4 times 60, which I know is going to be plus 240, is equal to 202. So I subtract 240 from each side, cancels here. Subtract 240, I see I'm going to have negative 38 is equal to negative 2T. Divide each side by negative 2. Divide each side by negative 2, and we see that that is going to leave us with 19 as our answer. 19. So we go find an answer choice that says 19. We see that that's going to be C. Okay, so key things there. Understand that what I did there is I solved for the variable that I needed. Okay, I needed to solve for the number of 2-person tents, so that's what I solved for. If you solve for the number of 4-person tents, that's just slowing you down and taking more time. Okay, because then you have to go back and you have to plug it into the fact that T plus F is equal to 60. So if you're solving for F first, you're wasting time because you get no points for knowing what F is. Okay, and then you got to go back and plug it in and solve for T. So understand, solve for the variable you're asked to solve for. That's going to save you a lot of time. So understand that. We're going to do one more problem, and then we're going to switch over to the math with calculator section. All right, so let's go ahead and do 13. Okay, so we have oil and gas production in a certain area dropped from 4 million barrels in 2000 to 1.9 million barrels in 2013. Assume oil and gas production decreased at a constant rate. Which of the following functions F best models the production in millions of barrels T years after the year 2000? All right, so key things here. I see I go from 2000 to 2013, and I go from 4 million barrels to 1.9. So from 4 million barrels to 1.9, that's a drop of 2.1. Okay, so I know my slope here, I'm going down by 2.1 million barrels per every 13 years, since that's from 2000 to 2013. Okay, I can already tell that they don't want me to have a decimal in my slope since there aren't any, so I got to multiply this by 10, thus giving me negative 21 over 130. Okay, I look at which one has that slope. I see the only answer there is going to be C for number 13. All the other ones have incorrect slopes, answer there is going to be C. As far as my intercept, we can also verify our intercept's +4 since they all have it, so we don't even have to worry about it. So the only thing we were working on there is the slope. Obviously, we can see our slope is going to be answer choice C. All right, so now let's go and switch over to the math with calculator section. So let's go ahead and go through a couple of the math with calculator problems so that way you're comfortable with those tomorrow. So let's go and start with number 9. We have what is the value of K in centimeters. We're told that our volume here is equal to 473 cubic centimeters when we read this problem. I'll go ahead and highlight that. Okay, and then we are also given our volume equation right there. So we're going to go ahead and set our volume equal to that equation for volume and solve for K. So we know it's going to equal 473. So now we have to multiply each side by 48 to get rid of that denominator. So we have 48 times 473. Divide each side by 7 pi to isolate that K cubed. Divide each side by 7 pi. And then at that point we have to take the cubed root of this K to the third power. Okay, so we take the third root of that. So I'll go ahead and put that there. We got the third root, thus getting rid of that third power. And we're going to be left then with the third root of 48 times 473 over 7 pi is equal to K. Okay, so I'll go ahead and write that down here. If K equals the third root of 48 times 473 all over 7 pi. Okay. All right, so we can just put that in our calculator and we're going to end up getting 10.11. All right, so make sure that you understand how to put third roots in your calculator as well, because you're going to need to be able to do that on the math with calculator section. So if you don't know how to do it with your given calculator, go ahead and Google it, because you need to know how to do it. Practice doing it. Make sure you can do it before you enter the test room tomorrow. All right, moving on. We got another question I want to cover. Deals with mean, medians, and modes. So that's going to be question 17. All right, question 17, we have the ages of 20 students enrolled in a college class. So the table above is showing the distribution of ages of 20 students enrolled in the college class. Which of the following gives correct order of mean, median, and mode? Right off the bat, I see my mode is going to be 18, which has to be the lowest, especially since there's no equal sign, like less than or least than or equal to. I know 18 is going to be my lowest, which is going to be my mode, so I can get rid of C and D, okay? Now, next thing, since that's because mode is the number that shows up the most there in a given data set, which is obviously going to be 18. Okay, next up I have my mean and my median. So some people here would go through and they'd calculate the mean. That would be a mistake because that's wasting time. Here's one thing I can do. I can immediately find my median, right? Let's go ahead and find my median. So I get rid of 6 up top. I get rid of 6 on the bottom. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I get rid of 1 here. I've got 3 left. Okay, I get rid of 3 here then. I gotta get rid of 3 up here and I'm going to be left with 2. I see my median then is going to equal 19. So I'll put median here. Median. Okay, so is my average going to be greater than my median or less than my median? Because that's all I need to determine here since I already know my mode is the least. Well, I see I have numbers like 30, 23, 22, 21, and 20 all pulling this average this way. So those are going to be pulling my average in this direction, especially this 30 and this 23 and 22. Now below 19, which is my median, I've got 18, which is going to be pulling my average this way, but since all those numbers are really close to that median, it's not going to be pulling as hard as all these numbers that are going in this direction, right? This 30 is far more distant from my median than that 18 is, right? So we have all those 18s which are close to the median, but we've got this 30 which weighs more on pulling my average in this direction, okay, which is obviously greater. Okay, so then we know that our mean is going to be greater than our median, thus our answer must be A for number 17. All right, let's go ahead and go through another problem that I want to show you today. Okay, let's go find it. And that is going to be problem right here, 22. So I want to deal with some percentages here. So percentages, what you want to do is you want to use the equation new minus old over your old. Okay, new minus old over old times 100. That's how you're going to get your percent. So let's go ahead and use this. So we're asked which of the following is closest to the percent increase in the billions of pounds of plastic produced in the United States from 2000 to 2003. Okay, I also want to show you something with graph interpretation. So in this graph, I've got a line of best fit, right? And given that, I'm told that X is the number of years since 1985. Okay, I was told the years 2000 to 2003. So if this is years since 1985, 2000 is going to be at 15. So I'm going to draw that line up on my graph. I see that that's going to equal at 100. 100. So that's my initial point at year 2000. Next year I was asked for was 2003. I draw that line up. Okay, obviously I'd be drawing straight lines here. Okay, so that's going to go over to 110. So I see that my new value is 110. My old value was 100. Okay, my old value is 100. I got to multiply that by 100 to get my percent. I do that, 110 minus 100 is 10. 10 over 100 is 0.1. 0.1 times 100 is going to give me 10%. So my increase there is going to be 10%. So big things to take away here. Pay attention to your axes, right? You can't just start at 0 and then go 3 over. You have to pay attention to the fact that it's since 1985. All right, and then also drawing those lines up to make sure you're getting to the correct spots. Correct answer for 22 there is going to be A. Let's go ahead and do a couple other problems, and then we'll get into the final tips I have for the SAT. So let's go ahead and find a couple that we haven't done yet. This one right here, 25, it's going to be a good one to review, so let's go ahead and do this one. The table above shows the population of Greenleaf, Idaho for the years 2000 and 2010. If the relationship between population and year is linear, which of the following functions P models the population of Greenleaf T years after 2000? Well, I see that my X change, right, the bottom part of my slope, is a change of 10 because I go from 2000 and year 2000 to 2010, increase of 10. In that time, I decrease my population by 16, so I go down by 16. Okay, 16. So we see that that's going to equal a negative 1.6 slope per year, and we already have after 2000, so we don't need to include it there. Okay, so C and D are wrong. We see that option B has negative 16, but it needs to be negative 1.6, so my answer for 25 will be A. All right, so key parts there, understanding with slope, how to set it up, doing your rise over your run. All right, let's find a couple other questions to do, and then we will wrap up. All right, so let's go ahead and do number 28. 28 deals with standard deviation, which is a good thing to quick review. So we have the 22 students in a health class conducted an experiment in which they recorded their pulse rates, beats per minute before or after an exercise routine. Dot plots display the results. We got S1 and R1 are standard deviation and range, respectively, of the data before exercise, and then the S2 and R2 are going to be standard deviation and range, respectively, of the data after exercise. Which of the following is true? Okay, first thing I see is that the standard deviation in the second one is significantly greater than that standard deviation in the first one, right? We see a standard deviation in the first one, very concentrated around our beats per minute before exercise, really concentrated around our average, right? Not a whole lot of deviation from that average or the mean. Thus, my standard deviation of 1, which is going to be my before exercise, is going to be less than my standard of deviation of my 2, okay? So it's going to be less than. Another way we could say it is that it doesn't equal. All of those would be true statements. So it's not equal. We know it's less than. It's not greater than, so that gets rid of those two. Now we're between B and D. Let's take a look at our ranges. Are our ranges the same? We see that we go from 88 to 56, or 56 to 88. That's an increase of 32. So we have a range of 32 there. Let's check our range here. From 80 to 112, also a range of 32. Ranges are the same. Thus, B is incorrect. Thus, my answer there is going to be D for number 28. All right. So I wanted to cover that one. Let's see if there's any other ones that I want to cover. Let's go ahead and let's cover, I want to cover 30 here a minute because I like these graph ones. I think that they're good to run through the day before the exam. All right, so we have the complete graph of the function f and a table of values for the function g are shown above. The maximum value of f is k. What is the value of g of k? All right, maximum value of f is k. Its maximum value we see is going to be at 3. Okay, now we're asked for the value of g of k. Okay, g of k is the same as g of 3 then. So g of 3. G of 3 means where x is 3. We know that g of 3 then is going to be 6. Okay, so g of k is going to be 6. 6 will be our answer there. That's going to be B for number 30. All right, so now we've gone through, we've reviewed for the math with calculator, and let's go ahead and get into my final tips. So congratulations on making it through the 14-day SAT prep series. Hopefully it helped you out and you're feeling better prepared to take your SAT tomorrow. Let's just go over some final SAT tips I have for you since you are taking the SAT tomorrow. So these are going to be less content-wise and more to do with just being prepared to take that test. So step number 1, you want to make sure that you're completely prepared. So what this means is you want to make sure you have everything you're going to need to take that SAT. So the College Board, they have a checklist. They usually give it to you when you sign up to or register to take the SAT, or I'm sure you can find it as a PDF if you just Google it. So just look up College Board's SAT checklist, go through, make sure you have everything that they're asking you to bring. So make sure you're bringing a mechanical watch if you're taking it in person so you can time yourself. All right, it's got to be mechanical, it can't make noise, and try to set it to noon at the start of every section so that way you know exactly how much time you're at. Additionally, make sure that you're bringing all the necessary forms and identification, right? You don't want to get there and get turned away because you don't have the right forms or ID. Make sure you have number 2 pencils if you're taking it in person. Make sure you have an approved calculator, preferably a graphing calculator. Make sure it's one of the approved calculators though. Water bottle, you want to make sure you're hydrated. You want to make sure that you have a snack if you would like one. I would recommend having it. And then also, like I said, anything else / everything on the College Board's SAT checklist. If it's on their SAT checklist, make sure you have it. And then pack it all the night before. You don't want to be rummaging around looking for something the morning of and then end up being late to your SAT. So make sure you get some sleep tonight as well, and make sure you're eating healthy food. You don't want to end up having feeling drowsy as a result of not getting enough sleep, or feeling tired as a result of eating too much food or anything like that. Or don't eat no food either, because you don't want to be hungry during your SAT either. Make sure that you set an alarm. Also, I'd recommend setting a backup alarm just in case, because you don't want to miss your SAT. Make sure that you're staying relaxed on the SAT day, right? Ultimately, it's only a test, right? It's not going to define your self-worth or anything, so just stay relaxed. Remember, you can always retake it. Keep in mind that a calm test taker is a better test taker. If you're panicking and freaking out, it's not going to help you. So just stay calm, don't panic. Make sure that you come up with a plan tonight before you go to bed as to what you're going to do if you start to feel overwhelmed or stressed on the SAT. You need to have a plan in place, because if you do start to feel overwhelmed, you don't want that to turn into you start panicking on the SAT, and then you start missing questions and you start really losing focus. So have a plan as to what you're going to do to calm yourself down if you start to feel stressed or overwhelmed. Whether that's taking deep breaths or some other strategy, make sure you do have a plan in place. Also, make sure you're staying interested. Okay, if you're interested in the content on the SAT and you stay interested, it's going to help you out. So make sure you do that. Also, don't ever give up. Right? If you go through your first section, if you go through the reading section and you don't feel like you did too well, don't give up. Keep going and keep doing your best throughout the test. Also, always give your best effort throughout the entire test, like I just said. And one other thing to keep in mind, even if you feel like you didn't do too great on the reading section, for example, understand that some colleges let you super score the SAT, which means take your best reading and writing scores and then pair them with your best math score. Okay, so you have the 800 section for your writing and for your reading, and you have an 800 section for your two math sections, which are combined into one math score. They'll let you combine those using your best one from two different test dates. Some colleges will, not all colleges. So keep that in mind. So you want to give your best effort throughout the entire test, because if you end up doing really good on the math section, but maybe not so good on the English, but then in your next one you ace the English, you can super score that at some schools, not all, but some schools. So always give your best effort throughout the test. Never give up. All right, I just want to say thank you for watching the 90 days of SAT prep. Hopefully you do feel better prepared before that SAT tomorrow. There'll be a donation link in the description if you would like to donate. These 90 days of SAT prep lessons took a lot of time, effort, and preparation, so I definitely appreciate any donations you want to send my way. Furthermore, any private SAT tutoring I'm doing, private college admissions consulting I'm doing, or private college essay proofreading and editing I'm doing will also be linked in the description as well. So be sure to look at that description before you're done with today's video. As always, make sure to like, share, and subscribe this 90-day SAT prep series. If it really helped you, be sure to put that in the comments and spread the word. As always, make sure to have a great day, and thank you for watching.